Oh man, these questions about favorite places and favorite photographs are like questions about which one is your favorite kid, your favorite child. I think my love of travel is newer or older actually than my passion for photography. I was always fascinated by stories in the National Geographic as a kid and things like that. But in the beginning, it was the experience of being in someplace different that drew me. But I found that when on my first trip that I really went overseas, it was a high school trip. I was a high school freshman, and our chorus went to Germany to perform for 3 weeks. And I just borrowed a camera just for the heck of it. And I found myself wanting to document the different things I was noticing, the wood, timber architecture of Germany, and the guys in the leather pants. They were still around back there in the 60s when I went over and stuff like that. So travel, the passion for travel came first, but photography and documenting those travels and documenting those different cultures happened almost in lockstep, almost one right after the other. The other passion that I had was for theater and acting, and I was actually training to be an actor. And the next big bump in my photography came when I was in college and I got a job with a theater company to tour Europe. We won a grant, and I dropped out of college, and I was saving for a stereo at that point. And instead of buying a stereo, I bought a good camera setup. And I spent almost 2 years in Europe, and acting is night work. So during the days, there was another guy in the company who was a very good photographer, and he and I used to wander the streets of Paris and Berlin and Vienna and stuff, taking pictures and trying to meet girls. And the camera was a great entree for both those activities. So I came back, I finished up my degree, I kicked around in theater for a while. A friend of mine was a reporter at this newspaper and said they were looking for news photographers. And I said, well, I've never shot news. And he said, yeah, but it pays like $140 a week. And I was like, whoa, every week, you know? And so I went down and showed my work and got a tryout. And that's what put me on the road to photography. But that road led to Jersey City and Newark, and it was a paper in North Jersey. So I cut my teeth as a photojournalist, working the tough streets down there in Jersey City and Hoboken, Newark and stuff. But, you know, having lived in Europe for 2 years and stuff, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to see the world. But I knew I needed training as a photojournalist. You just don't go out and do that. And of course, in those days, everybody's dream was to be a photographer for National Geographic. And in those days, if you were an award-winning newspaper photographer, you could get an audience with the director of photography of National Geographic. And I had won some awards, went down there, presented my work, presented my story ideas, and walked away with an assignment to cover the state of New Jersey as my first National Geographic assignment. I managed to survive that, not without difficulty, and that's what got me traveling the world and documenting it. Failure is part of the game. And in fact, you know, on my first assignment for the Geographic shooting New Jersey, I was trying to balance a number of other things. And they ended up sending up a staff photographer to fill out the coverage a little. And it felt, you know, it was tough for me to think that, oh man, I couldn't even get New Jersey done all by myself. We still had dual credit lines and whatnot. But the important thing was that I went back with more story ideas. I went back with new work. And, you know, in those days, they almost expected you to fail on your first assignment because there was no training to shoot a long-term National Geographic assignment. And one thing I didn't know was that I was not supposed to be balancing all my other little local assignments while trying to shoot a geographic story. So that failure can knock the wind out of you. And this was not a total failure because I did get, you know, a shared credit line, but it knocked the wind out of me. And but you know, coming from the theater, you learn to live with rejection. In fact, I often say that as hard as it is to make a living in photography, it's much harder in theater. So I was kind of battle-hardened in rejection by auditioning and not getting roles and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, the thing in any arts career is that there is no accepted path. Like, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you go to undergraduate school, you go to graduate school, you go to medical school or law school. There's a path. And if you do all the work, you get a little piece of paper at the end that says, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer. You know, in an arts career, be it photography, theater, or whatever, you do the same kind of journeyman work. You put in those years and everything, but there's no accepted path, and there's no little slip at the end of your apprenticeship saying, you know, you're a photographer, good luck, and set up your shingle outside, and your customers will start to come, like a dentist or a lawyer or a doctor. So you have to be driven from the inside. You have to learn to accept failure as part of the process. You have to get up when you get knocked down, and you have to do it repeatedly throughout your career. There's a kind of a conception that if you hit a certain point in your career, well, everything's the land of milk and honey. But in reality, you'll get these setbacks throughout your career, and they can come in the strangest ways, you know. But you've got to work through them. You got to be in it to win it, kind of thing. You know, you got to just keep getting up again. My most important project, gosh, it's hard to say. I think as I look back over my career, it's not a single project. It's a theme. It's my most important theme that seems to be coming out in my work. And you know, I'm 65, and it's taken me this long to kind of realize that I had a theme to my work. And that theme is to try to document societies and ways of life and people, unique people, who are going to be dying out as the juggernaut of modern homogenized society rolls over the earth. So I'm very interested in you know, small boat fishermen in Cornwall who are trying to do their jobs the way they've been doing it for hundreds of years, but the big fishing trawlers and factory trawlers are pushing them out. I'm very interested in the cowboys in southern France. They're down to 40 of them who take care of the beautiful white horses of the Camargue, and their struggle to stay relevant in the modern world. That I find myself drawn to stories of traditional societies, traditional crafts, and traditional people who are struggling to maintain their life and their way of life in the face of modern society. And I never, ever went out thinking, that's my theme. I was just drawn to those stories, and the stories all had that same kind of theme. Here's somebody who's trying to live this traditional lifestyle, who's struggling, and let me highlight it, let me document it while it's here before it disappears, and let me try to show why it's important that we try to preserve cultures and languages and stuff, because as we roll through these cultures and languages and stuff, and we just become more and more homogenous, and we lose part of that collective human memory and everything. So documenting fading cultures is something that I'm drawn to. The earliest example that I found of the impact that my photos could have on the outcome of other people's lives was one of my earliest assignments for the Hudson Dispatch in Union City, New Jersey. There was a mission for old sailors in Hoboken, and it was just a rooming house for all these old guys who were sailors. They all had their sailor's union card or maritime union card, and they had no money, no retirement, and they all lived in this boarding house on the waterfront of Hoboken. You know, where they filmed On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando. I could have been a contender. You know, rough, tough waterfront. And they were gonna, it was run by the Lutheran mission, and they were going to sell that and knock it down and put a ShopRite parking lot in there. And I went in and I documented the lives of these guys, and there was like 2 of them left, the older guys. And I did a picture page in the newspaper about that. And I said, you know, these guys' livelihoods and their life is being threatened by this thing to make a parking lot. Maybe they can find a parking lot across the street. So we mounted. We did a picture page on the one guy, and it got a kind of a grassroots. Now this is before the internet, before you could go on Facebook and start a petition and all that kind of stuff. This was in the 70s, so this is in the era of print, and the pictures got such a strong reaction from the readership that ShopRite kind of backed off the deal to buy the mission and stuff like that. We were able to stall that for about a year or two. And they were able to find other homes and other housing for all the inhabitants, except for this one old guy. They moved him to another rooming house not too far down the street. He was 86 years old, and within about 2 weeks of being moved, he died. And it's a common thing with older people who are uprooted very late in life, that they lose their will to live. And that caused a public upcry and everything like that. So I won and I lost. I was able to, through the picture page, find new housing for most of the inhabitants. They had a transient population of between 5 and 12, but I was not able to save that last guy. But we found homes for the rest of them, and that's early on in the 70s, before the internet, before all this kind of stuff. That's when I got the idea that, wow, these pictures and what I say can help people, or it can hurt people, and that's part of the responsibility that you have to exercise as a photojournalist and as a travel photographer. Well, you can exploit people. It's easy to objectify people if you don't have a good connection with the subjects when you're traveling in these far-flung places. They become kind of low-paid models. I see it sometimes. I've seen it on photo tours where it's like, everybody gets their portrait guy, their subject, and they're crowding around him like the press corps around the president and shooting and stuff. And to me, that kind of rankles because there's not a one-on-one with your subject and everything like that. So, travel photographers have to be aware that the images do have power and everything, and we do want to try to be responsible with what we show and how we treat our subjects, after we finish shooting them. I've seen that too. I've seen a lot of that. It's like, okay, that's it, light's gone, boom, walk away, and there's your subject saying, do I at least get, a good night kiss? On the New Jersey assignment for National Geographic, as part of that coverage, I went deep into the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, which is, believe it or not, a wilderness area. I guess if you've watched The Sopranos, you know that what the Sopranos use that as a burial ground. But it was a kind of an untamed big wilderness in the south of Jersey. And back when I was starting and doing this assignment for Geographic in 1979 to 80, there was a community of people that lived back there. And one guy that I met was a guy named Sammy Hunt, and he was a banjo player, and he built these hunting boats called sneak boxes, using steam bent wood. I couldn't believe that he lived in New Jersey, less than 50 miles from New York City, or about maybe 70 miles from New York City. That he was like a true backwoodsman. And I can remember over the years, I photographed him for the New Jersey story for National Geographic, but then I went back and I did a story on the Pine Barrens, and I kept in touch with him over the years. And at one point, the Smithsonian did an exhibition about the Pine Barrens, and they took one of Sammy's sneak boxes, and they took one of his rocking chairs, and they put it in the exhibit. And I remember I was following up with Sammy for something, and I said to him, Sammy, you're going to go down to the Smithsonian to the opening? President Reagan is going to be there to open the exhibit and everything. And he said, oh, no, I'm not going to go. And I said, well, why not? I said, don't you travel, Sammy? And he said, oh, yeah, I travel all the time. He said, I went all the way to Trenton once. Trenton, New Jersey, 30 miles away. And that line just hit me like a ton of bricks. I went all the way to Trenton once. I went 25 miles from where I was born. And he was in his 80s at this time. So I thought, there are worlds within worlds. There are peoples whose worlds are circumscribed and complete, and there are people whose worlds are broad. And as somebody who's lucky enough to have traveled the broad world, another kind of little mini mission I gave myself was to bring back images and stories for people who can't travel, or who won't travel, or who can't afford to travel. But if you understand another culture, if you can be made to see that the people who may look different from you still want the same things that you do. You want health and happiness for your family. You want a better life for your children. If you can humanize the strange, the foreigner, you're doing a service. And that whole little scene with Sammy kind of set that off. And that's why it's one of those memorable experiences for me, because it made me realize how small some people's worlds are. I think the personal kind of satisfaction that I get from what I do, and I was an assignment photographer my whole life, so I did a lot of work for money. While I needed to make the money to raise 3 boys and put them through college and all that kind of stuff, after a while it was a little empty inside. It was I was proud of that I could take care of my family and provide for them, but I wasn't getting any soul stuff out of it until I got more into travel and editorial and everything. I walked away from a pretty lucrative career and said, no, I don't want to do this. I want to just do travel, because I feel more authentic doing that than I do going in and making a lab that has cinder block walls look like the deck of the Starship Enterprise, with all my colored gels and all the stuff that we used to do with lighting back in those days. Oh man, these questions about favorite places and favorite photographs are like questions about which one is your favorite kid, your favorite child. Man, I don't know. It might have been an encounter I had with a tattoo artist in Morea. His name is Ronui, and I was doing a story on Morea, and I needed something about tattooing, because that's a traditional Polynesian art form. And I spent like 2 hours with this guy, and he was, to me, like a man in full. He had a family. He was comfortable, literally comfortable in his skin, which was covered with tattoos, with traditional tattoos. But he was at peace with his environment. And while we were shooting, his father and his children walked around in the water behind him and started picking up mussels and clams that they were going to eat for dinner. And I thought to myself, why would we not want to preserve these kind of lifestyles that allow a man to live the way Ranui was living there in this, he had his little stretch of beach, he had a very modest house, he had a beautiful wife, 2 kids, and he was taking care of his parents. And it was like this beautiful symbiotic kind of relationship between the parents, helped him take care of the kids and everything. And to me, to capture this portrait, and it was a complete accident. I was shooting portraits of him, and they came in the background, and you could just see them in the background, the grandfather and the 2 kids, and it kind of symbolized the nobility of these traditional cultures and family styles and stuff. And I guess that would be the shot. Although I got to say, I'm kind of uncomfortable trying to boil it down to one. But if I had to, I guess that might be the one.